Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 4 on my YouTube series on how to use Google Spreadsheets. So, let's just get straight into it. We're going to keep this episode relatively short. This is on formula functions. If you don't know what that means, well, hopefully I can show you. So, looking at this screen right here, if we press the equal sign, then we can input a formula. Yes? So, we can do, for example, 1 plus 1. And then that will automatically do that equation, yes? But we can also reference previous cells in these formulas. So we can do 1 plus cell A1, yes? And then that gives us 3. And then we can drag these down. So I hope that was just revision for you, because you should know that, hopefully. That was in episode 1. Anyways, building from there. We went over in the previous episodes a bunch of like complicated sort functions and how to summarize data and all, but there's a lot of things which you can do with this spreadsheet tool which really aren't that complicated and in most cases are better for smaller sets of data. So to start, first we need a data set, and I'm not using one of those sample ones from that site earlier. This time I'm using, well, we'll make one, and you'll see how. So we start with an equal sign, yes, and what we want to do next is we want to have a look over at this more button. Usually, if you have a big enough screen, then it won't show a more button, but what you're looking for is this little sign here. This is for functions. So we click that, and it gives us a bunch of functions, basically. Now, there's like hundreds of these. I have no idea what all of them are used for, but I'm going to show you one of the best ones in my opinion, which is the random function. So there's a few different random functions. By the way, if you just start typing after an equal sign, then these will automatically show up. There's a few different random functions, and I'll explain to you the difference between them. First, we have rand. This gives a random number between 0 and 1. So if we were to run this, firstly, we put nothing in the brackets. It gives us just a decimal number, yes? Except we don't really like decimal numbers here because it's easier to work with non-decimal data, at least in these examples. So perhaps not the rand function, but there's rand between, yes? Rand between lets us pick the range. So what we do is inside the bracket here, we put 1 and then we put a comma. Basically, all of these functions, they will have a brackets, right? And inside the brackets, you can put different arguments. And each argument should be separated by a comma. So this specific function requires 2 arguments. The lowest number possible and the highest number possible, yes? And let's just say 1 to 20, yes? So those are 2 arguments. Notice the previous rand function, not rand between, but just rand, that one required 0 arguments. That's why we didn't put anything in the brackets. So we enter that, and it's 17. But because it's random, what it does actually is every time we update the spreadsheet, it gives us a new number. So if I were to just put something into here, notice some of the numbers changed, and then if I were to remove that, they changed again. So that's one interesting thing about this. It's constantly random. So we have a random set of data, yes? And now let's test out some different functions on it. This functions tab right here, it has a few like commonly used functions in it, so I'll walk you through some of them. So firstly, sum, that's pretty self-explanatory. It requires 1 argument, but you can add multiple. So say if you were to have this and then you can put in a comma, and what I did was I just pasted in a cell reference. So in these 4 cells, we can also add something. Let's just throw in some random numbers ourselves, because why not? Right, and see that also affects it. So once again, you can have it as only these cells, yes? or you can have it as multiple arguments and then cover multiple cells. So that's cool. Let's move on. Let's try the next function on this list, which is average. So now this is also pretty self-explanatory. You just select the range, and then boom, you get an average. And the interesting thing about this is it saves you a lot of time, really, if you know how to use these functions correctly. Because if it weren't for functions like these, you'd have to do this plus this plus this plus, right? On and on and on to get this entire column sum, right? You'd have to reference each individual cell. But not only that, for like stuff like averages, even if we did have like a sum function, right? If you're like me and you make mistakes every once in a while, then it's nice to have these functions, because instead of having to firstly get the sum and then having to input that into a formula, see, you could do this, but it's easier to do this, right? Or this, sorry. And that's the main point here. You could write out all these formulas yourself, but it's easier to just use the provided functions. Now, notice I had to count out and put this in here, these 25, because there's 25 rows here of data. I had to count that out myself. Well, luckily there's a function to make that easier for us. So we can do equals, and then we can do, oh, whoops, I should not have selected it yet. We can do count. So now count will count the number of values, right? So if we just do that, then it'll say 25, because there's 25 different values here. So now you may be thinking, why do I need that? Because that's pretty easy to get. You can just scroll down and see how many rows. Well, firstly, as we mentioned earlier, you can have multiple arguments in this. So say you were to select multiple as in data sets, yes, and you wanted to count across all of them. That may be tedious to do by hand. And also, well, you haven't seen all of it yet, because there's something real special about this count function, and it is that it too has many different variations. So just like the random function that we saw earlier, there's different versions of the count function, including what's really awesome here, count unique. So now count unique, what this does is it will count every unique number in the data set. So notice we inputted this and it says 16. This means that there are 16 individual, like, different numbers that are represented here. So this lets us see our random function, it didn't include 4 numbers, right? It just randomly decided to exclude 4 numbers from this data set, which is interesting, right? There's another function, which is countIf. So now countIf, it basically counts depending on a set criteria. So once again, if we select our range, and then here you need 2 arguments, yes? You need your range, and then you also need the condition, right? So the condition can be, let's just say 17, yes? And now we know there's exactly 117 in here, which is right there, right? So let's just say you really hate the number 17. Now you know that there's 117 in there. So now we have count sorted out. But there's actually one more thing. Sorry. I'm a bit all over the place here, but there's one more thing with count. So now we have countif, yes, and okay, we have countif. Sorry, wrong. So we have countif. Now, you may be thinking, right? Well, if this can count numbers, can it count text, like letters? And the cool thing is, it can. So if we do countif, then we do different range. Let's say E column, yes? Different range, and then what you want to do when you're using text in these, you want to use quotation marks, yes? So let's just put in banana, yes? So we're counting 4 bananas in column E. So there are 0 bananas. If we put in a banana, count goes up. Banana, banana, banana. And I assume you know how that works. So, count of banana. So, that's it with count function. Now let's, we can remove that because no more bananas. So sad. So now we have the maximum and minimum function. These are the last ones which I'll be covering for today, by the way. So, these are pretty self-explanatory again. You pick the function, you pick the range, enter. So the highest number in this data set is a 20, which is right there. So now if we were to do the same with minimum, so the smallest number in this data set is a 2. And once again, you may have noticed throughout the video, because of the way that this random function works, it randomizes it every change I make to the spreadsheet. So all of these values have been changing every time I add something to a cell or move something around, which is honestly, it's a really cool part of the function, because it shows you that it is constantly randomizing it. And that's about it for the basics of these functions. Of course, there are hundreds and hundreds of these, and I will leave a link in the description to the official function list if you really want to go through and see if there's anything more interesting. If not, then that's it for today. I'll see you later, I guess. Make sure to subscribe and like the video if you liked it, of course.